All right, everybody, give me a sign. Everybody good? Fantastic. This is a new format for me. This is should be interesting. You guys all look fantastic in your headphones. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Lenny Gusel. I'm head of fraud solutions for Feedzai. Welcome to the workshop. For those of you that don't know us, Feedzai, we are a global fraud and financial crime technology solutions company. We work with major banks, financial institutions around the globe. We're super proud and happy to sponsor Gusel. We're super proud and happy to sponsor this workshop together with our MasterCard partners, who you will hear from in our second panel. Just to give you guys level set for what's going to happen in the next 90 minutes, we're going to have two panels for you here. We're going to start with a panel with some banking fraud leaders and talk about what are the banks doing for all things scams and fraud. And we're going to, I'm going to introduce our panelists in a moment, but again, just level setting the rest of the time. We're going to go for about 35, 40 minutes with a panel of fantastic participants here. We're then going to transition, and we're going to bring up another panel, and we're going to talk about what are the payment networks doing, and what are the controls and all of the different things that the payment networks are really focused on for scam controls. And we're going to try to do a smooth transition and bring on our next set of panelists and go for another 35, 40 minutes or so with our second panel. So with that, let us get started. First, let me quickly introduce the distinguished panelists here. I'm going to start from all the way there. And you will all notice that Chad, unfortunately, is not on our slide. Chad is from Capital One. He is leading fraud strategy for Capital One. Thank you, Chad, for being here. We've got Fabian from Scotiabank, senior fraud leader at Scotia. We have Jen Martin, head of fraud for Citizens. And we've got Ravi here, who is head of trust and security for Chase Bank. JP Morgan Chase. Everybody, thank you so much for being here with me. I really appreciate it. We're gonna start by just asking you all, and I'm really gonna kind of go down the line. All the banks and all of you have focused heavily for a long time now on the scams problem. There have been many investments across the board in your fraud strategy and across the fraud lifecycle. I'd love to hear what are some of the latest things that you're focused on. What are some of the innovations that you're particularly focused on rolling out, and what would you like to highlight within that? Chad, with you.
Okay, wonderful. It's on. Cool. All right, thanks for bearing with me. We made the Gusel team's life really hard with pictures. Later, you're going to hear from Hunter, but it'll be my picture. So prepare yourselves. I'm Chad. I'm with Capital One. I manage all of our customers' deposit relationships. So anytime a customer might fall victim to a scammer or a fraudster, that's my responsibility if they have a checking or savings account with us. A few things I would mention that we've invested in. One is really contextual warnings in our authorized push payment flows. So if you're sending to a Zelle recipient for the first time, if you're sending a wire digitally for the first time, we have tailored warnings to guide customers through that and then back them down from potential scam scenarios. Beyond that, we have invested in interactive authenticators that let us more kind of in the moment tailor the authenticator to the customer. This helps in particular for social engineering schemes where someone might be pretending to be the bank. Before we give you a one-time PIN, as an example, we'll say, hey, were you truly trying to send a Zelle or a wire? And then lastly, I can't not brag about AirKey. AirKey is an applet on your card chip that will let you tap it to your phone and authenticate you. It is a hard token bounded to a KYC'd identity that you keep in your pocket. That's a really compelling pitch, right? So we use that in our high-risk transaction flows as well.
Thank you, Chad. Fabian, please.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having us here. It's really a pleasure to be here on this panel. And I wanted to take a moment before talking about the specific solutions that we are implementing about the investment itself, which is quite difficult in the banking industry to obtain, especially related to scams, right? Because joking aside, traveling to the markets, by the way, I'm in charge of international banking markets fraud in Scotiabank, so that's everything outside of Canada, Latin America, the Caribbean, and the second part of my job is global transaction banking on the commercial and corporate side. So traveling through different markets, sometimes I sit down with other financial institutions, and they tell me, we don't have a problem with scams. Why? Because we don't pay them. So that's where the problem starts, right? Because we don't recognize the problem. And I was so happy to see in Ken's presentation, the picture on the right, customer advocacy. Putting the client in the center. Even if we don't have to pay, it's the right thing to do. And that's what we have been prioritizing in Scotiabank, to get investment in a proactive way, not after someone goes to the regulator and complains. So that's a big change, right? And that has helped us a lot aligning it to the business lines, because that generates trust for the clients. And that is part of the business as well, right? So everything is linked. And once we get that investment, then we go into the implementations. And similar to what Chad was mentioning, in our digital channels, we are doing intercepts in the money out journeys, applying machine learning models. So whenever the transaction is suspicious, a recent Benny that was added to the customer, the amount, the frequency, the velocity, we put a stop in there, right? Think about it. Are you sure this is a new beneficiary? Do you know the person that you're sending this money to? So making that pause is kind of the last opportunity that you have before the exfiltration happens.
Thank you, Fabian, and I appreciate the way that you kind of framed it. And I definitely want to get a little more into the topic of liability shifts that are happening around the globe and that we could expect here, both in Canada and the United States, of course. But it's important for us to frame, and the intent of our panel here in general is to really highlight the tremendous investments now for several years and that I know that you guys are all making. So, Jen, please.
Yeah, so very similar, tremendous investment in new signals, but also we're really taking a whole of fraud. We heard a lot about whole of government approach. We're doing the same as a whole of fraud. So yes, we're making investments in our digital signals. We're making investment in our real-time ability to have great profiling data of our customers, so we can have a high level of precision on, hey, that really looks anomalous to this customer. We've got to interdict smartly with them. And then I run, as any head of fraud does, they run a large operation that includes a phone center and the whole resolution of fraud. So it's really also training our detection and customer service analysts to be able to do that right outreach with the customer. We heard a lot about behavioral psychology, like how do we get the message out? Because we've had those phone conversations where, people are so convinced in the moment that there's this is a legitimate transaction. Like step one is how do we highlight it? How do we find it? And then step two, how do we convince that customer that they're in the middle of a scam and get them to stop?
Thank you. Ravi, to you.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's a common theme in what you're hearing across the group here in terms of actually slowing the customer down, and that's a key part of what it really comes down to from a true scam prevention perspective, because at the end of the day, by the time the customer is actually there to move money, they've fallen victim to the scam. It's already happened. It's ultimately whether there's a monetary loss associated with it comes down to, do they actually successfully move money or not? And I think that's a key part of it. So across channels, I mean, similar to what others have said, we have a machine learning model that's constantly looking at different signals in our digital experiences and potentially brings in the right intercepts to slow the customer down. Similarly, across omni-channel experiences, so we have a large branch footprint, we have customers walking in, and so we have bankers who are trained now to actually look for appropriate scam signals, and we have the tools deployed to them in order to slow the customer down in branch as well. And so whether it's a cash withdrawal, whether it's a wire transfer in branch, we call it the big red button, and the banker can effectively stop the transaction from actually happening and refer it back to our operations center, where, similar to what Jen mentioned, we have behavioral psychologists who are constantly training each of our representatives, and we have a dedicated scam queue now where they're trained professionals who are talking to customers to try to break that spell. The only other thing that I would just probably add is equally important to all of the things we're doing for scam prevention is not getting caught out by the false positives. And so we also want to make sure we're not stopping the good customers. At the end of the day, it's their money, and we don't want to make it too hard to get your access to your money. And so more signals and more intelligence to refine and reduce false positives just improves the overall customer experience as well while preventing fraud.
Thank you all. I'm going to shift focus to a particular kind of scam that I know that has been a major focus for all of the banks, which is bank impersonation. Hello, I'm calling from the fraud department. And it is a particularly pernicious type of scam because even the most educated and kind of the smartest people out there that I know have fallen for it because we expect that level of relationship and trust from our banks, and it's really exploiting that. And I know it's something that you guys have particular pressure to work on. Anyone who cares to jump in, when you're looking at specifically bank impersonation scams, what are some of the things that you're focused on, and how have you looked to mitigate that?
So we have, over the course of the last year, been working on kind of integrating some of the new solutions from telecommunications providers to prevent our phone numbers from being spoofed. That's kind of, for folks who are not familiar with the trend, sometimes like a customer gets a text message, hey, we noticed it's an authorized transaction, and then the fraudster, depending on how you reply, will then spoof a phone call to you, kind of mirroring the number from your bank. And so we've been looking for ways to like intercept that, to prevent that spoofing. And there's solutions on the market now that do that. And our learning journey has been a bumpy one because we started with what we thought were our toll-free numbers, all of them. And then fraudsters found the other numbers we didn't know about because we're a large company and there's many toll-free numbers. Then when we covered that, any guesses for what they did? Your branch network and our cafes, they started to spoof those numbers. Those are much more localized to the customer. So now we've got those covered, and then you kind of have to cover every nook and cranny. So we're encouraged by technologies like that. I think we also realize the limitations of them. Like, I would love to be able to protect that initial text message. I would love to be able to protect any other number from being spoofed in this way. Like, I'm glad and want to protect Capital One numbers, but there's many other ways that threat actors and fraudsters and criminals will find their way through. And so I think that's one of the things. And then the authenticator, where it's interactive, is another way. We're just trying to like kind of break the moment of, hey, I'm actually not trying to like send a Zelle. Like, I think I'm on the phone with someone. And so we're trying to use those moments to get smarter on that particular threat.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd probably just add to everything Chad said. I mean, similar sort of journey that we've been on, and with any new technology, and I think this has been a close partnership with telcos, and would encourage more partnership there, which would really help. Like we launched call branding, and what we saw was they would spoof the number that is actually now branded. So now you actually have a scammer calling, and it will actually say Chase, not just the 1-800 number. And so, now we're sort of onto the next phase of actually authenticated calls, where you'll have the green check mark, and there's a big customer education component there, which is what we're equally focused on, while also working with telcos on product solutions. Is how do we actually tell customers on what signs to look for with bank impersonation scams? Keep that constantly updated, because every time we get a new thing out there, we see within a week the same tricks that we told the customers are the ones that are being adapted by the scammers. And so we need to continue to look for those signs, but ongoing customer education is also going to be a key part of this. As new technologies come out, customers do need to understand what that technology is. Just like with call branding, we saw most people assumed that couldn't be spoofed, and even that was sort of beatable. And so continuously talking to our customers is a key part of it.
Yeah, just to reinforce what Rai was saying, constant and proactive awareness campaigns and education is key. I mean, we saw it in one of the presentations that if it is a one-off every quarter, people forget, and then we need to go back. So we need to keep the pressure on, reminding some basic things like, we're not going to ask you for the OTP, we're not going to ask you for your private information, because people don't remember. Now, a big part of those attacks, they come through OTP SMS. So we're trying to move away from that to in-app push notifications as well, which is much more secure. Now, granted, you can disable the push notifications as well, but that's what we're trying to do. The OTP is kind of the max stripe of the new era, right? So yeah, that's what we're trying to do as well.
Yeah, it's a great analogy, Fabian. And Jen, I'm actually going to change the topic a little bit as you're picking up the mic, because it's related. You mentioned interdiction. And new types of interdiction and being contextual. And so as we all know, there's awareness and education campaigns are critical. But as I know you're all experiencing, and as you mentioned, Jen, I'd love for you to share a little more about whether it's interdiction or we use the word intervention, but being able to get in front of the customer during the actual scam life cycle to the extent that you can in a contextual and relevant way. maybe if you could talk a little bit more about what you're doing there, and anyone else, please jump in.
Yes, yeah, and it's one point I was going to raise to the last question is just, as we know, it's a layered approach. You'll hear that from every head of fraud, right? It's not any one solution, and this comes into the contextual messaging. You have to use all of your solutions. I'm glad you mentioned the branch network, right? That's the other part. So you've got data coming from all different channels, different paces, tempos. Like, you have to be able to use all of that in signals across a multitude of different touch points to really interdict here. So there's never going to be any one silver bullet, like we're going to stop scams with one solution. It's going to be like, what tools do we have on that inbound phone call to know that that could be a man in the middle situation? How am I training my agents to listen for like potentially someone, like the long pauses and getting information back where some signals that there could be a man in the middle? And then how do we interdict, right? Then, like, now we've seen some like red flags emerge. Okay, we really feel like we're in a scam situation. How do we, have a different conversation? Or in some cases, just hang up. Like, we'll have a situation, right? If we really believe that there's a man in the middle, we'll just disconnect on our own side. And we've told our agents to do that. And then get a proactive. Usually, then the customer will like look to the number on the back of their card and call us back, which is great. But it's any variety of those things that we want to make sure that we're interdicting to in each product, and then each customer, small business versus consumer versus larger market commercial accounts all have kind of different styles and techniques you want to use for interdiction, and different products.
Different products and all those different typologies for across those different business lines and customer types. And I'm curious if any of you can weigh in. I know there's new technologies and new solutions coming out for particular digital channel in intervention. So as opposed to static pop-ups, which everyone was using, and static warnings, but being able to have those be contextual and more real time and specific to the actual journey that I know that you're all looking at and working with. Go ahead,
Yeah,
David.
I think we are starting to implement behavioral biometrics, in our digital channels, because when you are operating a channel under a scam, it's not your normal fingerprint of action, right? So we're capable of detecting those in real time, but then going back to the break the spell, we know that someone is being scammed the moment we call them, and now we need to convince them that they are being scammed. So that's the second part of the equation. And that's where the training of the people is key, because on the other side of the line, you have someone that for months has been groomed, and he really believes he's sending money to the boyfriend in the oil rig, right? And all of a sudden you say, no, you're being scammed, hang up, don't send the money. So that's the second difficult part of the equation, but it's a combination between, cognitive psychologists and behavioral biometric signals. Yeah.
Yeah, probably just add, like, we've been on this journey of static signals, static intercepts, and how do we improve it. So it started with originally, like, if you're sending money on Zelle to a new recipient, just an intercept that says you're sending money to a new recipient, are you sure you want to send this money? We then saw in our data that the majority of where we actually saw scams originate was on social media. So then we actually introduced more of an interactive questionnaire where we asked the customer, where did you actually meet the recipient you're sending money to? And we actually said Zelle is not the right payment method for you to be sending money if you met the customer on social media, and we would actually block that transaction. What we then saw is now customers would actually then go back and just change their answer and come back, and we see 70% plus of the customers still putting through the same transaction. So then the next evolution of this has to be, okay, how do we then engage in the right conversation? And it can get burdensome if you're going to refer every one of those into the operations call center. So we're looking at digital innovation there to start to have more in-depth conversations with the customers. And this is where, again, eventual partnership and more signals will help us improve that solution as well.
Shifting gears, talking about mules. As you all know, mules are almost kind of the key ingredient from scammers in order to move the money. And those mules exist at every single financial institution. They may be yours, they may be somewhere else. Several years ago, Jen, we talked about this before, mule account monitoring was really in the province of AML teams. That has shifted dramatically over the last several years, and I know all of you are now almost have have taken on that function within fraud organizations with collaboration, of course, with your AML partners. Maybe talk about a little bit what that looks like for you. How is it working? And my follow-up question to that is, what are the controls that you're actually putting in place for inbound payment monitoring? Maybe if you can cover some of that together. Go ahead, Fabian.
So in our case, to your point, historically this has been in the AML kingdom, right? So we're getting closer to work together with those teams and respecting the objectives of the teams because they are more on the compliance side, and the frequency for that compliance doesn't really comply to our necessity, which is more real time. We're starting to implement jointly more machine learning models that increase the frequency for the detection of the mules, right? Because we cannot really wait 1 week until someone in AML detects a mule and the money is gone. So that's number one. Number two, similar to the conversation on the scams and behavioral biometrics, we are also implementing in our channels as part of the onboarding more kind of behavioral biometrics models to detect the activity on the mules, which are pretty typical, right? From the moment of opening the account, there's a dormant period, and then all of a sudden a deposit, and then the exfiltration of the money. So we're also going into that route as well of implementing that kind of models more real time, right?
Yeah, no, it's fascinating because you're talking about here really profiling across the journey from account opening through to what might happen afterwards, and then to both the money movement in and money movement out. Almost, the holy grail of what we've all been looking to in our fraud systems for many, many years.
And something else to add, which is kind of basic, but many times in the banks doesn't really happen, is do a proper KYC, right? Because at the moment of the onboarding, there is a lot of declaration of information of what is the profile and the behavior and the intent for that account, but many times that is forgotten in a form and it's not used anymore. So we're trying to get that information as well, because if we see that you declare $5,000 average balance in a month, and you're getting $30,000, something is off, right? So that's also key, which could be very basic, but effective at the same time.
Okay, I'm going to give a little taster for the session after us, but one of my hobbies is reading network rules. The Zelle network in particular will require the receiving institution of any kind of fraud or scam payment that's claimed as fraud or scam by the sender to do something with that account, review it, make a decision on it. And I just think sometimes doing the basics, I think that's a great rule. I think if you get a hold harmless notification from another bank, that is such strong signal. It may not be truly fraud or scam. You may not have an actual money mule, but it's worth using that hard signals to make a decision. So that would be thing one. Thing two is figure out where you want. I love the idea of profiling kind of across the life cycle. And then you've got to say when and how do we choose to interdict? Are we making sure we're building fraud models and rules that are targeted towards, hey, this money came in, it is otherwise irrevocable funds, it's a wire, it's a Zelle, it's some other kind of authorized push payment, but we still need to make a decision on it to do our part as an ecosystem participant to find and remove mules from the ecosystem. And so doing that, and that requires having good models trained on that target, making sure you can see that target, and then figuring out how you operationalize it. There's a lot of complexity there, but I think using the hard signal of what you get from other participants in a given network or payment rail, and then building and expanding on how you detect and interdict on things coming into you that you might otherwise not be liable for, so to speak. It's an irrevocable payment method, but still important because you might have a mule on the other side of that money.
Go ahead, Robbie.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, I feel like you can almost put the mule problem into three buckets. There's at account opening, and so there's a bad actor coming in and opening the account, and it's all of the strengthening on account opening that everyone's talked about that we can continue to do to improve that. Then there's the new world of scam as a service, where you can go buy accounts, aged accounts. So accounts that have performed really well, and I think Ken alluded to this earlier in his presentation. It could be international students, where we're seeing a lot of these kind of patterns where accounts are for sale, and it's a well-aged account, it's treated well across the network, and that's where I think a lot of the behavioral biometrics and behavior are key, because if there's a sudden change in behavior, that's something you want to detect. And then there's a third, which is really you're not intending to be a mule, you're a victim. And so I think there's an equal investment in actually tracking those, and then how do you actually make sure that you're protecting those customers in those cases, because they may not have been willing mules, but yes, they were bad actors, and you don't want to completely get them out of the banking system. So building the right end-to-end protocols and actually protecting victims in those cases is equally important.
It's a great point. I mean, a new wrinkle on how we even think about account takeover in that case, with account takeover for the purpose of controlling an account for mule activity. And in that context, maybe switching gears, there's also a lot of shifts in terms of the responsibility as well as the accountability for the banking industry to monitor create the kinds of fraud controls that we've always had for outbound payments, but for inbound and receiving. Across the different payment rails and whatever, and however that money is flowing. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about what controls that you've already put in place and what you're working on for inbound payment monitoring, both for the problem that you just described, Ravi, and in general, for any type of muling activity that is coming into your organization or for scams. As you're talking about incoming, maybe if you can comment on what control are you able to put in place, given the regulatory frameworks, for what you can do in terms of holding it, stopping it, and so on. Yeah. Please. Go ahead, Rob. Yeah.
So I think with the changes in regulations across both Nacha and Zelle, and I would say independent of that, we were already on the path of sort of building out recipient intelligence, really sort of looking at how well do we know the customer, or is the funds coming in fit the pattern of the history? Is there a good sort of tracking on where that money is coming from, good signaling from the originating institution? And then I think the broader sort of signal dependence that we have is a key part of it. So looking at the source of the transaction. So if it's money coming in, there's signals we're collecting from the originating institution, but then also what else are we actually getting from why the transaction's actually happening, and being able to get those upstream signals is a key dependence and something that we want to continue to work on and improve holistically. I think network level intelligence of what other history is associated with that specific identity, if it's been associated with any sort of bad activity in the past is a very helpful signal, and that's where we partner closely with EWS, and Ben's going to talk about it a little bit more. And we have a key sort of dependency on that. I think from a regulatory hurdle perspective, the issue always has come back to liability. So the false positives and getting someone out of the banking system that is unfair, and what does the liability framework around that look like? I think that's something that still remains unresolved and has always been a key hurdle for increased data sharing in general.
Yeah, thank you. Jen.
Yeah, same. And we talk a lot in the space about fusion, the fusion model is out there, and I think it's one of those things that as you're looking at inbound, what we do is we may not have a formal fusion center, but we are fused together with our data, and so this is where we do use data from our cyber partners, certainly AML, because they kind of started in this space first, plus fraud, and how do we get all of those signals together to monitor those inbound payments. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of it's still just Benny match. It's good old Benny match, right? Is that account, is that payment coming in the same titled as what you have on your account, right? Sometimes it's those easy things. And then when you flag some of these payments as being suspicious, and we have that highly trained team then to go and look and see, are there multiple payments now coming in from different locations, all mistitled, right? Those are all identifiers. What's the use of the digital platform, right? What we'll see about mules is they're often they're checking their application every 5 seconds or refreshing it because they're watching the inbound payment coming in. So what can we learn from red flags on just the use of the application as well? Because that's usually a signal that we'll want to monitor. And then, how do we, close down these accounts? And we use Neo4j, or how do you use then tools to go and kind of what spiderweb, just kind of connect them to, are they connected to other accounts? What we know about mules, it's rarely just one. They kind of are deer. You never just see one deer, you see a whole herd, right? So if you've got one mule, they're typically tied to a bunch of other mules. So you want to use, tools that do that connective analysis to find like all of them and bring them together. And then a lot of times then that gives you the insight to reach out to that other bank, because a lot of times the funds are going to the next bank, to reach out to them and say, hey, we have like a bunch of accounts that are all sending payments to this account at your place. You might want to go take a look at it.
Just to
Fabian,
add-
yeah.
Sorry, one more topic. In agreement with everything, I would say the only other addition is consortium data. And there is a few folks in the audience that are working on solutions in there. But we're talking about international cross-border networks that are standardized in the way the metadata is shared across countries. So if we can have that consortium data available, that is going to be very powerful to stop more fraud.
Thank you. Chad.
I think the group handled it really well. I don't have much incremental data.
Well, then you know what? I'll dive into a bit the kind of that liability question. Ravi and Jen, you both mentioned it. We've seen the shift in the United States and Zelle. We've seen almost a de facto shift from at least operational liability in the new NACHA standards. You're all monitoring very closely what's going on around the globe. We've heard kind of earlier. I don't remember, someone said that there's a non-zero chance in the United States that there's going to be liability on both kind of senders and receivers. How do you think about that, and how does that then dictate your posture and your strategy?
I can start if you want. I mean, and given the perspective from Latin America, we have been riding the wave of liability shift since 2020. I mean, it's already there, it's already happened, and there are two ways or two different flavors of liability shift. One that is more leaning over to more political consumer protection advocacy, and the second group that I distinguish is more focused on dictating the standard controls that financial institutions need to implement, which I prefer. So the first one started in Chile, 2020. The law 21234, basically the statement was any bank was mandated to pay any type of fraud in 5 days, no matter what. If you didn't want to pay, you need to get a court order and get the judge to fail in favor of the bank. You can imagine that everybody started, claiming for the coffees in the morning. I didn't do that transaction. We're not going to pay a lawyer for that. So that created a situation that skyrocketed the fraud losses, to the point that the National Bank in Chile started to lose $20 million US per month. After that, there was a change. So the change was, before you go to the bank, you need a police report. And that controlled it, right? So that was a start. And then recently in Peru, there's a new regulation that is called the 504 that dictates, notifications, biometric controls. You cannot use OTP anymore. So that's kind of regulating the controls in the sector. Mexico is the same. There are new limits that need to be implemented, flags for vulnerable customers, and so on. So in that case, we have been able to leverage regulation for the investment, which is a good thing, right?
Yeah, it's a really, really powerful distinction in terms of building. Makes it a lot easier to build the business case, to build the technologies that you guys need. Anyone else? Chad, go ahead, please.
I feel bad since I've got the mic, and it would be hard to get it over there, so I'll take a spin. I think the thing I've often thought about for liability shift is like our goal is we want fewer scams, period. Like we want to lower the water level. And I think if you were to like just do a liability shift, let's say at a bank level, you could end up, as Fabian just mentioned, like actually increasing the water level. Like you have more victims, you have more false reporting, you have more complexity. And so I offer that to say that like maybe that comes in the future, but I think what we can agree on for now is like what are the solutions to lower the water level overall? Like within banks, like I think tending to mules, like finding, removing, recovering funds for victims. Across other sectors, like how do you prevent the MOs that are happening kind of outside the four walls of a given institution so that it's harder for threat actors to try and create these? And I think if we get there, we'll lower the water level. And if you lower the water level like low enough, hopefully it doesn't become an issue anymore, if that makes sense. Like if you solve the root cause problem, then kind of how you move around the water afterwards becomes less pertinent. And so I would say I've spent more calories in thinking on that dimension than on like implications of a future liability shift.
It's very helpful. Jen?
I really have nothing to add to that. I mean, that's exactly spot on both, right? Like, love policy change, right? That says like, here's the right kind of controls to have, as well as like, how do we then go and look at the root cause? I think is important.
Yeah.
One more comment, sorry, Ravi.
Please, please.
But I think that many of these regulations have been also a little bit myopic because they're penalizing the banks and we are at the tail end of the problem, right? So I think examples like Australia are much more comprehensive because you consider the full life cycle involving from where the scams are starting, right? So I think considering for the future and how to influence policy, we should see the entire life cycle, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know there's a lot of attention being paid across the globe to the Australian model as it's looking more comprehensive. And you all know us fraud practitioners as well. As soon as there's an imposed liability shift, and Chad, you talked about, and actually Fabian, you talked about the massive rise in the first-party fraud. That's a result. So it's a complex issue. Anything to add, Ravi?
No, I think you just took the words right out of my mouth because I was going to go exactly there. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, like I said at the beginning, the reality is when a customer is moving money, they've always already been a victim of a scam. And I think that's always important to remember because I think we often talk about measurement of scam in the financial losses. And maybe like there could be 100% prevention, but the time loss, the emotional cost associated that has already happened, that is still very much true. And so any sort of like overall sort of prevention, to Chad's point, we have to look at actually victim protection. It's not just about the monetary part of it. And then a full ecosystem approach to any sort of liability shift is key.
Yeah. I want to end on a question that I know is near and dear to all your hearts and has been really a big focus for the banks. And Jen, again, you started talking about the basic collaboration between sending and receiving institutions that has been going on for a very long time, which is, hey, we see something on your side. And that is kind of the bread and butter of fraud operations and fraud practitioners. How do you see the evolution of systemic collaboration and that kind of signal and intelligence sharing between sending and receiving institutions? What's promising and what are you looking at and working on in terms of really enable that and empower it? Start with you, Jen.
Okay. I mean, I think obviously there's a lot of conversation, and there's several different entities leaning in on setting up the framework to do more information sharing. I think it's got to be actionable from a fraud perspective, right? What we know about some of this intel is if you're a good fraudster, you're not going to sit on your mule account for months on end. So me getting 3-month-old data to somehow put in a strategy is probably not going to be really actually effective, right? So I think we have to keep looking at what information is actionable that was really going to move the needle and across all the different banking sectors, right? So I work for a regional bank that heavily concentrated in the Northeast. Like I have different needs than a large national bank that has, customers all over the country, right? So I think the platform number one is first and foremost. We have to have a method by which we can share information. And then I think we have to keep looking into like what information is actually going to be something I can use in a strategy or I can use in that moment in time to make a difference.
Yeah, I'll build on that. I think the platform is needed. And then I think that is like almost the case for networks and consortiums, because then a given bank can plug in there, know what to expect coming in, and like get leverage across the ecosystem, not just with individuals. I'm so thankful and grateful for many of the folks in this audience who like I have a relationship with, that if something is really going wrong with a customer or situation, like I can pick up the phone and call, and that only scales so far. And so I think like what networks and consortiums can do is like help you scale, help you like stand up processes and procedures around it in a way that like our human relationship is really important, but can only kind of help in particular situations as opposed to kind of smother the problem.
I just wanted to adding to what was already said, I think we all know which ones are the 4 or 5 simple data elements that we need to share across our banks, right? We just need to do it. We need to take action. And I think we also need to learn from already implementations around the world. We have the friends from Singapore in the audience. They have a very comprehensive data sharing framework that is published, taking care of encryption, data transport, data residency, all the questions that we're asking ourselves. So we need to learn from those experiences as well and just make it happen.
Thank you. Ravi, anything?
Nothing to add to that.
Appreciated. So, with that, I want to transition to our next panel before we do really a round of applause and thanks to all of our panelists. Yeah. Thank you guys very much. And with that, I want to bring up our next panel, please. Apologies, everybody, for the slight mix-up.
So much more hair.
You got one?
Should we let them stand up and take a break from the headphones?
Does anyone need a break? Take your headphones off for a second. They're ready to go. They're ready to roll.
I would not have been ready to go yesterday after 40 minutes with those on.
All right. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I hope you guys can hear us well. And this is the second panel of today. And nice to be here. Thank you for the Gusel organization for inviting all of us. So this is the second panel, and we'll talk about the importance of the payment networks. So my name is Seçkin Yılgoren. I'm leading security solutions for MasterCard North America. And in the next 40 minutes, we will be talking about how banks and payment networks are partnering together to fight and to protect their customers and their businesses and their partners about the reputational and emotional and the financial impact of the scams. So as you all know, scams are one of the growing threats in the industry. Like last year alone in the US, almost $13 billion has been lost by the consumers. Globally, this number was around like 1 trillion. And these are only reported numbers. And as the reality is even much harsher than this. But in the panel today, we have a unique opportunity because when we look at the banks and the payment networks, they have a unique advantage. They are the ones who can really see all the money movements from card side, from the account to account side, and also considering the technology we have today is we have more tools and data than better and than ever. So it gives them a unique advantage to be able to spotting trends and understanding the vulnerabilities and developing solutions and share data. So the big question is how they are doing it and what will be coming next in the future. So I'm very privileged to have this conversation and to dig into these questions today with Ben, Stacy, and Hunter. I'll let you guys maybe to introduce yourselves first and your organizations, and then I'll jump in with the questions.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. Hopefully everyone can hear okay in the audience. I'm seeing some head nods. I'm Ben Chance. I'm the head of fraud for Early Warning. For those that have been practitioners in the industry, we're really the original fraud sharing consortium that powers account verification in the United States. For those that haven't been in the industry for 30 years, you probably know us as the network operator of Zelle. And so I'm also responsible for fraud and scam prevention on the Zelle network. Chad talked some about that. The panel will get into more details around how we do that and what we do at the network level through the questions. With that, Stacy.
Thank you. Stacy Beard. I work for Bank of America, and I'm an executive managing prevention for our clients against fraud and scams. I noticed that a lot of the titles say just fraud, head of fraud, but I specifically always add fraud and scams because I do feel like scams is primarily what I've been focused on. We've got great control for fraud. It is so much more difficult in the scam scenario to break the spell, as the other panel had talked about. And so just pleased to be here and excited to talk about the network.
Awesome. Hunter Roberts, Capital One, colleague of Chad's, but on the credit side, so the credit card issuing side of the Capital One, I lead our fraud ecosystem partnership strategy. So I am responsible for all of our strategic relationships with networks, credit bureaus, third-party vendors, and basically anyone else in the ecosystem with the exception of law enforcement. And Seçkin, back to you.
Perfect, thank you. So maybe let's just set the stage for everyone. And Stacy, I want to start with you. When you hear about the scams, what are your organization are most what comes top of mind for scams, and what are the main issues or concerns that we have?
Oh, so scams are so complicated, and as the other panel had talked about, we are the last step in the scam. So we are where the client has decided, the customer's decided that this is real, whether they're buying a goods and services or whether they're trying to, invest in cryptocurrency, they have decided that this is real. And so we're trying to break that spell by identifying through our network the different types of, through different models and different signals, what could potentially be a scam so we can try to interdict. So I work on the deposit side. And it's very interesting because the clients want money movement to happen instantaneously, real time, whether it's a consumer or a small business. Like, they want that immediately. And so we really try to educate our customers that you should only send those real-time payments to people you know and trust. And we say that over and over again. We do that through interstitials as they're going through the payment flow. And so we're doing everything we can to try to break that spell. But it is a very complicated space because they're definitely invested and they're targeting individuals. And these romance scams where clients are losing hundreds of millions of dollars because they really think that they're investing in their relationship and the love of their life. It's a fascinating space we're in.
Ben, same question.
Yeah, it's again, it's really complicated. I mean, it's really complicated. And I think from an industry standpoint, most of us grew up as fraud practitioners. We were here to stop fraud, and we designed all of our tools for stopping fraud. And what we've had to do is think about those tools and rethink about those tools in a concept of stopping a scam where it's actually the true name person that is the owner of the account that you are interacting with. But the behavioral biometric signal now doesn't look, is it the way I enter my password? It looks for a lag in the payment flow. The device ID fingerprint looks maybe a little bit differently. And so it's thinking about adapting those tools to stop and identify the scam and then drive some sort of interstitial. That's the first piece. I think the second piece is, for me personally, at least in the Zelle network, is it's not about authenticating the sender. It has nothing to do with authenticating the sender. So it doesn't matter, all the consumer education that we do, the interstitials that we do, they're really, really important. But what really matters is authenticating the counterparty, the receiver. And so what we've done is really shifted to a receiver-side risk model in Zelle and mandated the adoption of that receiver-side risk model across the entire network, and for free, gave it away for free also. And what we've seen is really a marked reduction in fraud and scams because of that, because we're sharing industry-level data across all the accounts in the profile at the time of money movement. And that, for me, has been like a fundamental shift, and I think the type of shift we want to see all payment networks adopt.
100%.
So as the credit card issuer, I've got two things. Thing one is the proliferation of just scam merchants' ability to onboard to the payment network rail. Leads into thing two, which is, Fabian sort of mentioned it in the first panel, and going to other banks and hearing that scams aren't a problem. I think we've heard the same thing from a lot of other credit issuers, is that scams aren't a problem. They are. Why would this proliferation of scams leave out merchant transactions that are happening on traditional payment rails? They won't, and they don't. So I think the second thing, the trend here is really to, like, for any of my credit issuer FI friends out there who this is news to, like, come talk to us. Like, I'll talk about the journey in a little bit, but we're confident that this is not a thing that is that's limited to account or crypto.
Yeah, and I think the thing, maybe to build on that for a second, is it's not limited to those things, and we have to think about, why are the criminals going there? They're going there because that's the weakest link. Exactly. We've put chip card, 3D secure, behavioral biometric, device ID fingerprint. We've put all these things in at certain levels. So the next place to go is you have to compromise the human themselves, the consumer in this scenario, or you have to set up a fake merchant website or some other way to go do that. And we have this sort of bifurcation that's going on in the industry, which is there's like the most sophisticated types of attacks that are going on, and then really lower sophisticated in terms of, like, technically, but they're attacking the individual. And of course, there's still good old-fashioned check fraud that's out there. But that's really what we're seeing, is this sort of bifurcation towards the scam vector as a way for these criminals to monetize.
Plus one.
100%. I think that's a very fair point. Like, when the fraudsters are trying to get the silos and the weakest link, they find the weakest link, they will just exploit that. Hunter, I want to ask you on the specific thing, because network data has always been very valuable to spot the trends which undetected in the maybe on the individual side or an issuer and on an acquirer side. And I know you guys have, as Kaplan, even though you guys have a massive issue, you guys have leveraged different network data into your like scam allocations or understanding and prevention. Can you a little bit talk about that and your approach?
Yeah, I can. I think it's probably best to just like tell the story of like how we got here, and then sort of hopefully encourage everyone. And I'll get to the fraud reporting aspect of it. But for us, pandemic scams was sort of the thing that led us to find the problem that we found during the pandemic. Tons of reports about marketplaces selling fancy masks, antidotes, test kits. Had some executives inquire about like the legitimacy. Are our customers falling victim to these? Let's go find some of these and see if we're seeing any transaction volume. Colleagues of mine that are here in the room today were a part of some of this work, and they didn't find that the pandemic was a problem, but the methodology that they used to look for the pandemic scams led them to find a much bigger problem just with traditional scams. So over a 5-year journey, we have increased our investigation staff. We have a scam strategy, business analyst intent, just a full-blown, like it is its own part of what we have traditionally thought is like fraud strategy. As part of that, we started going to the networks and saying like, hey, you got a problem. Like these, for the most part, international payment service providers or payment facilitators are onboarding these like in a massive clip, and it's all bad. And what did you guys look at us and say? Are you telling us? Like, where's the fraud report? Well, it's because it's all moving over into like a dispute. It wasn't coming in as unauthorized activity. It was authorized. So we weren't reporting the transactions that were problems to the networks. So over the course of all of this, we realized that that was a area that we needed to give visibility to the networks. And for the last 2 years, we've been able to deploy a really aggressive and probably novel for most credit issuers authorization strategy that allows us to look at dispute fraud and non-fraud dispute levels over a certain period of time. If it clips the threshold, listen in on some calls. If everyone sounds the same, shut that merchant down, look back, grab every transaction that we've ever had with that merchant, report it all to the network. That starts to put some of the pressure on the acquirers and some of the delegated authority that I'll talk about in a little bit to the PSPs and the PayFacs, and starts to engage, hopefully, if everyone's doing it at scale, some of the programmatic controls that the networks have.
100%. And I think kudos to Cap One for starting this, because as they are starting this to report all this sub-segment of the scams to MasterCard or the other networks. We will be able to give this to all the other issuers as well. So everybody will benefit from this information. And the information sharing is critical because we are all fighting the same fight. Ben, I want to get you based on what Stacy said. Stacy said with the romance scam, so now account to account or P2P have created a new risk in the industry. And how do you see the fundamental differences between what Hunter was bringing about the card networks and non-card rails, and what needs to be done differently on the scam side?
There's a parallel journey that each of the rails are on, and so for us, we are currently and have always been blind to that first scammer interaction with the victim. Right? We don't know that there was an initial text message or phone call or puppy trying to get purchased. We just don't know, or romance, right? And so we're blind to that today. We'd like to not be blind to that in the future with additional data sharing and signal intelligence through telcos and others. But fundamentally, what we do know is what's this consumer account and what's that receiver account. And so we've been on a data journey to make sure we're collecting more and more information at the network level around the receiving account. And that allows us to give a better real-time signal to the sending bank to be able to then do the step-up verification or other types of verification or just flat-out decline. And a lot of that has, for us at the network level, is as an individual bank, you don't know that 10 people are trying to send money to Stacy right now because Stacy's the most prolific romance scammer in the world. You don't know that. because you just have one customer trying to send money. But we can see that at a network level. So a lot of our attributes is the account itself associated with fraud or scams, but we have like a number of real-time attributes that are real-time computing velocity metrics, number of unique senders, number of unique payments, dollar amount profiles, all that sort of stuff. So really where we're going is similar. It's all about data sharing and the collection, but then getting feedback from all of the banks in the network and the consumers and really looking at what's going on to say, this additional signal would be very helpful if you could go get it. And then we go out and build that particular signal and then integrate that into the risk engine. Last thing I'll say is I talked about sending that signal to the sending bank, which is where we started. It turns out the signal is really powerful for the receiving bank also. And so, again, this was something I didn't contemplate earlier, that sometimes at the network, we might have more data on the receiver or in a more digestible format than the receiving bank does itself. So we now send the same risk signal to both the sending bank and the receiving bank. So in case the sending bank essentially let it slip through, for lack of a better phrase, if the receiving bank sees an anomaly, meaning that I just got 10 Zelle payments in the last 10 seconds, the receiving bank can accept without a post and hold that payment and do their own receiver side investigation. And that for us has been sort of the next step of the journey, as making sure we're sharing that data in an equivalent manner across both sending and receiving institution.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Stacey, I'll come back to you. You mentioned that everybody wants instant decisions. They want to make they want to make the transfer instantly. But when we send the money instantly, it's very difficult to get it back. So I know that that's a big challenge for us. So what would be your expectation from the payment networks about which tools or processes to give it to you, or to give all the issuers in order to trace, isolate, or maybe prevent the scam payments to be done even before happening?
Yeah, I would say that the best-in-class payment network has to be Zelle right now. And there are mandates that if you are participating in the Zelle network, that you have to report fraud and scam real time. Like, that's a mandate. And so the reporting happens instantaneously. And so because these payments are happening so quickly, once the payment is gone, that next account has already moved the money out. And so we can't react within hours. We now need to react within seconds. Like, it has to be real time that we're identifying this, or else the money has already gone through the system through 2 or 3 banks. I would say that, as Ben said, that recipient data is so important, and we have that in the Zelle network. We don't have that in all the other networks yet. We're working on it, but it is not there. And one of the other things we talked about earlier today is that there are types of payments where you just don't have the history. So, for example, I'm part of a romance scam. Of course, the bank, I don't know that that's why you're trying to wire money, but how many times do you wire money in your life? Once, twice, as you're closing on a house? So you don't have the patterns. And so do you stop every single wire that's being executed on your platform? Like, you just can't, because of the fact that the client wants those payments to go out. And they're probably closing on a house right now, and so they want that money there. So we do need better insight into recipient data. But as we talked about over and over again throughout these last 2 days, it's also about having other intel. Like, are you currently on a phone call with somebody else? Like, we don't have any of that insight other than just what's happening within our bank, and then with those signals within the payment networks. So that other data is going to be so valuable, and I'm really excited and hopeful that we can better share. But it's complicated because we, as a bank, are regulated. We need to protect the privacy of our clients' data. And so it's a complicated space, and we just need to figure it out, though.
100%. Go ahead, please.
Maybe if I add to one level.
And you didn't pay me.
No, that's not a paid spokesperson at all. Appreciate that. There's a 20, not a Zelle, sorry, a Zelle 20 out in the lobby. I think the other piece that's really hard is, if you're like me running a particular network, I can run that network. But if you're a sophisticated criminal, you don't make the secondary and tertiary money move in the same network where you committed the crime, right? You're jumping to an ACH, you're jumping to a wire. You might jump to cash, right? You might jump to check. And I think the journey for us as an ecosystem here in the U.S. is how do you take what we've done in Zelle and apply that, the way Stacy said, to other rails, but then how do you integrate those risk signals across the rails? So you really understand the receiver in a holistic fashion across not just Zelle, but you understand their ACH behavior, their wire behavior, their check behavior, their stablecoin behavior, whatever that may be. That's really the end game for us right now, to have a much more comprehensive view of the receiver, and that's what we're working on in the consortium at early warning right now.
Thank you, Ben. We heard even before the panel and also yesterday in the main stage that scams originate generally about the social media, or it originates from the in-apps. So considering this, Hunter, I'll go back to you. What do you think that the payment networks can maybe engage with non-financial institutions like telco providers or tech companies in order to avoid the scam process happening before reaching to the victims?
It's a good question. I'll start in another spot and then I'll get there. I think the thing that we typically do as fraud practitioners, Ben, when you said it, I kind of cringed because I was like, oh, this is going to be like a fraud answer. But like when you see a problem, the first thing that we think to ourselves is like, go left, like move left one spot and figure out like, where's this coming from? And when we did that, we started to realize that there's just a lack of controls upstream of the network and upstream of the network client that allowed bad actors to get into the payments ecosystem and transact. History lesson there is basically like in the 4 or 5 party model that historically existed between issuers, networks, merchant banks, and the merchant, there was a layer over the last like 20, 25 years that put itself in between the merchant and the merchant bank. Payment service providers, payment facilitators, like all doing like legitimate good work to make payments easier, make e-commerce easier. The problem was there's varying levels of controls in all of those things. So you get a delegated accountability between the network client and this new capability, and that allows for quicker access to the network that was out of the control of the network. I think to MasterCard, to Visa's credit, like the Visa Acquire Monitoring Program is a step in the right direction to sort of get control over the entire ecosystem. We've worked with Sechkin and his team for years at this point to like figure out what are the right answers to like control for that problem. So just want to like give you guys your flowers for that work. But I think I'm more excited about the work that we're doing with you guys now to figure out like what is the collective data sharing like solution, and like how does Capital One engage with GSE, and how do we encourage MasterCard to either acquire different types of signals from some of the companies that you mentioned, or contribute it into a consortia that we can then leverage and share into. So like that is that's what's next, and I think we just need to move pretty quickly to get there.
No, 100%, and thank you for the shout out as well. Tracy, you mentioned at the beginning that like as the bank, you always see the last transaction. So if I want to send money to Malaysia because I found the love of my life, and then even though you tell me, hey, am I sure, I want to send this money. So this is like actually, how do you think, which additional data would you like to have from the networks, and in order not to come to that stage, but to be able to intervene in advance and avoid this bad transaction to be happening, because then they are able to be calling you by saying, can you refund me the money?
The additional data we need is from all of the private sectors, whether it's the telecoms, the websites, Meta, like all of the collaboration within where those scams are originating would be valuable insight to know if we should be interdicting and if we should be having different conversations with our clients, because it is a scam versus a fraud. The challenge is getting that data ingested is not easy. It takes a long time, whether we're ingesting the data or sending the data. It takes a long time to get through governance, to get through contracts, because it's different companies. I mean, it is a complicated space to share this data even if we wanted to be able to do this like tomorrow. So I'm really interested in the different data elements that we will be able to share and be able to ingest into our strategies to better make our models predict if there's a scam occurring. I did want to just mention, like, we've talked a lot about this network and this data. We are finding that, to Ben's point, the criminals are taking the victims off of the payment network rails. And so they're now having the client go into a branch bank and take out cash. And then they're asking that client to maybe deposit it into an ATM, or maybe to have a courier come to their house and pick up the cash. And these customers are so convinced that they need to do that. And I do believe that that really goes to like the bank impersonation, where they feel like their money's at risk and the only way to protect it is to take it out. We see that same thing with the credit card side, where the customer is told, like, you know, this is the FBI and we need to investigate your credit card. You need to put it in your mailbox. We're going to come pick it up because we want to look at the chip and see what's happened in that scenario. And so getting like them off those payment rails, you know, they're getting trickier. And so even when we get that data, if they're taking us off those rails, then what do we do?
No, I think the education piece is very critical, and I think it falls all of us. Like the customer education at the end of the day is the main piece. Otherwise, like the criminals are becoming so creative every day. If we don't educate our customers, our partners, all the users, and they will just fall for the traps anyway. Man, that actually shows, there was a Gusel study done this year which shows that scams really erode the customer trust. And almost 11% of the customers are saying that, like, now I wanna decrease my like spending. I don't want to use digital anymore. So Ben, as you see all the issuers and all the networks, like how we can help to the financial institutions to rebuild their trust with their cardholders at the end of the day.
It's a really difficult problem because I think once that trust has been eroded, it's almost impossible to get that back. But I think the first answer is more toward Chad's answer, which is just lower the water level. Don't have the problem in the first place, right? Attack the scams at the source with additional data, pipe additional data to law enforcement for use in prosecution, and really build a more comprehensive data sharing framework that has appropriate safe harbor. Because you cannot share data in a way that exposes you as a network or you as a financial institution to some sort of class action litigation concern or other concerns that could be really, really problematic. And so it's really establishing the data sharing protocols, I think. On the customer recovery, I think there's a lot around education, which is what we see is you're a consumer. You said you wanted to buy a puppy. We told you the puppy's not real. You said, no, the puppy's real. We said, absolutely, the puppy is not real. Did you touch the puppy? No. Okay. The puppy, you're deworming an imaginary puppy right now. It's not a real puppy. Okay. And if you still go through with that, I think the customer at that stage has like a reasonable, like, oh, they told me they were trying to protect me and I pushed through despite the protections they were trying to put in place. Robbie talked about this with the interstitial message. Did you just meet them on Facebook or not type of approach. But even then, if you're the victim and you've lost money, you're still angry at the end of the day. And you can't push that anger to the criminal because you can't get to the criminal. So you push that anger to the financial institution or the network. And so that's where I think it's really important to have appropriate, fully trained, dedicated specialists who can talk that customer through, explain what went on. And in the case of where we can recover funds and making sure that we've isolated those accounts, we can do funds recovery, we can do consumer protections associated with that. But at the end of the day, the answer is lower the water level. That's the answer. Make the network safe and make it a trusted network and or institution to do business with.
No, 100%. I think that's a very fair point. But how we will be balancing between the customer experience and the security? Because like if you, every time you step up or you add authentication questions or then any transaction will become so dramatic for me. I would like to go 3-4 steps higher every time I want to send the money or I want to make a transaction. How we will balance that? And I want to ask all of you, because I think that's a critical question. Do customers want to additional steps in the account-to-account transfer to Stacy's point, or like what is the balance between customer experience and security?
Yeah, the step up in a scam scenario isn't effective because it is the actual client doing the transaction. So you can't step up with one-time passcode or a text message. They're going to say all day long, "Yes, this is me. I want this to happen." The challenge.
Want the puppy.
I want the puppy. The puppy is real. The challenge with the interstitials and the messaging that we provide, and we try to tailor it to the type of scam that the client may be a victim of. The bad actors are coaching them through how to answer those questions. And so there are times where, we'll ask these questions. We may decline the transaction. They'll go right back in and select a new answer to that question so that the transaction goes through. And so the bad actors figure out through each of the bank's messaging. I mean, it's easy. If they have these mule accounts, they're going through our interstitials themselves. And so they know exactly what we're going to say. And so they can coach the victim through the process. So,
Andrea, how was your side?
I think on the credit side, there's not a whole lot that we can do because it's a lot to process, like a 3D secure scam merchant transaction. It's pretty expensive. So like that doesn't happen. They're just going to go like volume. So there's not a lot that we can do. I think we've done some pretty creative things in our shop to monitor levels of claims, intervene at a point, look back. We have some alerting capabilities that if we feel like this is likely a scam, we will not necessarily decline, but we will just alert the customer to say like, we have reason to believe, right? And then I think the other thing that we do is for the customers that were unfortunate enough to have transacted with a scam merchant prior to us hitting that threshold, we have some processes and customer communications aimed at those individuals to say like, hey, we've noticed this merchant has been a problem. If you had a similar problem, like feel free to reach out, and that at least gives them some ability to initiate some recovery.
How about you?
Yeah, I'd say yes and to all of those. I think it's about intelligent or smart friction. I think for me, and when I think about like the network design, so asking me to do 6 OTPs in a row is not helpful, right? It's just a hassle. I don't like that. I don't want to bank with you anymore. I don't want to use that wire service like anymore. But reasonable friction, asking me as a consumer to enter my account number twice for a destination for a wire, I don't see that as unreasonable. I see that as a verification that's going to make sure my money gets to the right place. And so when I think about that in terms of scam and friction, I think the focus has to be around education. And informing the consumer to make sure they really know who they're sending the money to, and they know the risk associated with that, or the payment cannot be reversed, and that sort of messaging. So for us, the friction that's in the network, the first interstitial that we mandate for everyone in the network is what we call the validation of the recipient. So we go to the receiving bank, we pull the KYC verified first name, and we present that back to the customer. That's huge. If I think I'm paying Stacy and it comes back as Hunter, I know immediately I have a problem. I should stop. And I may have miskeyed it, or I'm about to be the victim of something, right? And I think there's a second warning message, and we talked about some of the tailoring that goes inside of that that's education-based. I think consumers appreciate education when the financial institution is advocating and on their side for the friction. I think when it's friction that's for friction's sake and the consumer doesn't feel like it's benefiting them, it's just benefiting the financial institution, I think that's where the balance tips in the wrong direction.
100%. No, thank you. Thank you for all the answers. Maybe one final question, and until I figure out maybe a new question at the end, but the AI and generative AI. So now with the deep fakes and like the fraudsters have become much more strong, much more unfortunately dangerous, because they can really imitate, and it's very difficult to make the difference between a scam or not a scam. So how you guys are leveraging machine learning, generative AI in your organization to fight for the scams and to fight for the scammers?
So we've been using AI in our models, machine learning type of AI for decades, because it is all about anomalies and detecting. We do need to continue to evolve with the ability to use internal models, continue to develop those, but then also the consortia models are so powerful because it gives us insight into things that we're just not aware of. And so those types of AI models will be really impactful.
Thank you.
Similar answer. I have a personal reaction to the interchangeability of AI and ML. I think we're largely relying on machine learning in most of our models. Generative AI as an adversary is pretty scary. We're looking into how to solve for that, but I think just fundamentally the layering in a new question of is it real before is it what I think it is just conceptually a thing that's gonna affect everybody in ways that we may or may not be ready for.
I'll just yes, and obviously using machine learning and other advanced techniques around building our models. As a network, though, we have some very powerful risk signals or attributes, and we don't know how powerful those are when they get combined with banks' signals and or attributes, right? So we might provide a numeric score, but every time we provide a numeric score, we're providing an attribute pack behind that, because one of those attributes may turn out to be a really powerful risk splitter in your machine learning model.
Yeah,
right?
that's the thing that we don't understand how much of the other signal can tell you that a thing isn't real.
Right.
And you almost need the thing that terrifies you the most to be able to prove it. So part of me is in this weird space where we need to see some of it to determine if there are other sort of non-Gen AI detection signals that can tell you if something is real.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't know how to feel about that.
Yeah, it's you got to see the bad thing to model on the bad thing is the classic scam and fraud problem. I see the other problem just with Gen AI in particular is you've just quick show of hands, who in the last 2 days has received a fraudulent email or text message while at GASA? Okay. The entire room. I mean, the entire country has, right? You're sitting in the Global Anti-Scam Conference and someone just claimed to, buy Bitcoin out of your PayPal account. Guaranteed, right? And my problem with those messages in Gen AI in particular is they're getting much more sophisticated. They're really crisp. They look like they're on bank letterhead. The misspellings are gone. The capitalization, the context is all correct. They're really, really tight. So I think the problem is they're going to become more and more convincing to consumers in email, in text, in phone calls, especially with voice spoofing, where you can spoof you've got an international accent, but you can actually spoof a domestic accent. You can spoof a call center agent and video chat with someone today. All of those are problems. They're real problems. They exist. We have to have solutions. But at the end of the day, the money has to move. Okay, and so we can control where the to from is on the money movement. We understand those risk signals, and we have to focus there as financial institutions and networks, and then get those additional signals upstream that Hunter talked about, and then pass those signals downstream to law enforcement or other providers. I think that's the way we eventually win in this space.
100%. Guys, thank you so much for being in the panel and for all the inputs. My final question is, if you want all the room to take one key takeaway from you guys, what you want them to do, and go back to their organization, and is it education more, is it data sharing more, is it doing a more technology development, just one key takeaway for
I probably just reinforce the thing I already said for any of the financial institutions that have credit portfolios. This is a problem. I think since the beginning of 2024, and I hope the team doesn't get mad at me for throwing a number out here, we have declined almost $500 million in scam merchant transactions. We're a big bank, but that's an astounding number in 2 years. So again, happy to help evangelize this. The reporting back to the networks is critical. And it will absolutely, with some of the new things that I think MasterCard's hopefully going to be announcing soon, like chat, I also like to read MasterCard rules and announcements. I think getting that signal back to the network is critical.
Data sharing is very important to me. But what's exciting for me that I know is going to be coming in some of these networks is the ability to real time submit the claim over to the other bank and then allow that other bank to pause that transaction so that they can do an investigation so we can recover these funds for our scam victims. That is so important. And it provides trust with your bank when the banks are working together and are able to do that.
I think that's a great bridge to mine, which is like focus on the receiver side risk. Focus there. And if you're a receiving bank, focus on that risk. Your historical AML programs and things of that nature, essentially all money coming in is assumed good until proven otherwise, right? And we have to think about that differently. We have to think about that inbound fund and is that in line with my expected transaction pattern associated with who I just onboarded or not? And is that an anomaly? Is that an indicator where someone is either an intentional mule or an unwitting mule in certain scenarios? But really focusing on that receiver is, I think, the key to stopping the problem.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was great and all the great insights. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.